if you can't see, if you need to twist and turn everything into something good, I think you're fooling yourself. It's okay that some things in life, because it's life, are what they are. They may not be good, they may not be bad, they may be good or bad, or they just may be.
So what role does attention play in our lives?
Oh, great question. You must have had an amazing education.
It wasn't bad. It wasn't bad.
No, so it ends up that attention is really a fuel for everything we do.
Hmm.
And the way to describe it sort of most broadly is it has to do with it allows us to think, so make decisions, deliberate, consider alternatives, to feel, meaning regulate our emotions, as well as really to connect so we can take other people's perspective, etc. All of those, if you kind of dig deeper into the literature, each involves attention. And when people have excellent attentional capacity, we see success in each of those. And when they don't, we see failure.
Wow. And do people have like varying like abilities in their capacity to pay attention?
They do. And, attention is a pretty broad term. There's a lot of different subsystems and subprocesses. And then there's another term that I talk about called working memory.
Hmm.
So if you remember back to cognitive psychology, this is another brain function that's sort of like close cousin of attention. And it has to do with maintaining and manipulating information over very short periods of time. Just sort of like the way I describe it is it's like the whiteboard of your mind with sort of disappearing ink.
Hmm.
So if you're calculating a tip or remembering a phone number till you get to your phone to punch it in, which nobody does anymore, we're just repeating it to ourselves over and over again, and that's working memory. So both of those definitely have individual differences, and then there's specific things that can degrade them or really minimize their effectiveness.
Working memory is super important, sort of like the work table
Yeah,
of conscious thought.
that's right. That's right. Absolutely. And this is a one where, working memory itself is sort of a general resource, just like attention is, but then there's different subdomains. So we've got working memory for visual information, working memory for auditory information. And that we can advantage ourselves by kind of maximizing using all of them at once if we want to have a richer experience of what's going on.
That's super interesting. Yeah, I really want to know how we can boost our working memory because this is something that um, you know we definitely when we're young, it's something that we perhaps take for granted, but our working memory typically, I believe what's typical is that as we get older, we tend to falter in our ability to have the same ability to, I don't know, remember. And so, yeah, anything that we can do to boost working memory and to boost our ability to pay attention, I'm super interested in.
Me too.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, that's the thing, right? The fact that we know this is such a powerful brain resource and so central to everything else we do, if we can maximize that, then everything else will sort of flow from that. And a lot of times I think people kind of focus in on the consequences of this cognitive fuel instead of trying to get to the heart of the matter and bolster it. And that was sort of the hunt I was on was how do we get it to be stronger, more effective?
Yeah. How did you become interested in this topic
In the topic of attention working memory?
and mindfulness?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, all of those, it sort of happened in stages. Initially, I was interested in the brain and brain function and very interested in how we might be able to strengthen it. And at that point, mindfulness was not on my mind at all. In fact, I would say I probably was a skeptic regarding anything that was not scientifically rigorous or
Hmm.
proven. So, and at that point, this was early 2000s. Mindfulness was not a thing. Like I would never have expected, oh, fast forward 20 years and you're going to be talking to somebody about it on a very popular platform. No way. So initially, I just wanted to figure out how it is that we can understand how the brain works, really its specific mechanisms, because I thought that was a great route by which we could understand its vulnerabilities and potentially how to strengthen it. And so attention and working memory became sort of really exciting to me because it ends up that they modulate or impact the way everything else goes on in the brain. They bias information processing in this very specific and powerful way. So I thought that would be a great topic to study. And it has been a really, really fun topic to study. But what we learned over the subsequent years is that, it's very powerful. It changes perception, it changes decision making, it has impacts on all these things that we were just talking about. but it's not bulletproof. And there are specific things that will make these functions vulnerable. And so then I was like, okay. And when you look at what those are, those vulnerabilities, they're very common. They're things we all experience through life. But for some professions, it ends up that they're really problematic. So, just to name what they are, things like stress and threat and poor mood,
Mm.
and even the drive to multitask, which isn't a real thing, but to task switch. These are all things that will deplete more rapidly and more profoundly these core resources. And so if I think about, I got interested in mindfulness because I was one of those people who's suffering from all that stuff being depleted. And I wanted a solution. I wanted a solution that I could offer because I knew that for me, it was not life or death. If I mess up something, if I have an attentional lapse, it'll be annoying, but it's not going to be devastating for anybody. Even though sometimes it can feel like it in our own lives when we feel like we just can't keep hold of what we're trying to keep hold of. But for some professions, and this is what I got really interested in, medical and nursing professionals or military service members or judges or lawyers, if they miss information, the consequences can be quite dramatic.
Mm.
And so I was kind of on a hunt at that point. I'm like, okay, we know enough about how it basically works and how it works in a way that looks like it's more vulnerable. How do we train it? And that was not an easy answer. At that point, again, early 2000s, there wasn't a lot out around this topic. And the kinds of things that people were trying, like brain games, for example, they were people were already starting to cast doubt on brain games as being beneficial. So, I mean, just to describe what I mean, essentially having these simple cognitive games, and they feel like games. They're just little video games that you can play. People got better and better at them, and people got really excited. Like, look at that, I'm getting better. My attention. This is an intentionally demanding task, and I'm getting better at it when I practice it more. But when you transfer now to a different, even slightly different task, people are back to normal. Like
Mm.
they don't look any better. So it suggested the brain is smart, as we shouldn't be surprised to know. It's gonna become specifically tuned to the thing you're doing, but it doesn't always generalize to another thing.
There's no like spillover effect.
There was no spillover effect with brain games. And so I was like, this is not the answer. I mean, people are starting to try to figure out many different ways to maximize brain games, but it felt like maybe there's going to be a solution there. But I think there's one important component that's missing with brain games that we need to try to target, which is that basically, even if you're better at laser sharp focus, if you don't cultivate the capacity to know where your mind is in any moment, you won't know to even devote laser sharp focus.
Mm.
So how do we target that capacity to notice and find out where our attention is? Because there was another piece of data that was quite troubling, which is most people, most of the time, meaning at least half the time, 50% of our waking moments, have no idea where their attention is.
Mm.
And they're definitely off task.
Very interesting. I think that I've had some degree of subclinical ADHD. Always struggled academically. It's one of the major reasons why, despite being passionate about health, nutrition, fitness, medicine my whole life, really, I didn't go to medical school because academia was always so difficult for me.
Mm.
But I was never diagnosed with
Mhm.
anything. Um, and yeah, so I'm always interested in learning about ways that I can increase my focus and attention, particularly being able to direct my focus and attend to things that I don't necessarily find that rewarding. Like my brain is
Mhm.
like a light switch, and I'm sure you find this among many clinically among people with ADHD, is that if I'm super interested in something, I can hyper focus on it. But if I'm not super interested in something, I can't focus on it at all, which is a problem when you go through the sort of one size fits all educational system, right? You're constantly asked to focus on things that you don't necessarily find that rewarding or enjoyable.
And anything in life, right? There's going to be parts of the process that you're going to gravitate toward, others that are not going to be that interesting. I mean, even think about this podcast. I mean, there are aspects of it that I'm sure you're like, yeah, I'd rather not do that. But the goal is still something that you value, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that is really, really important to try to cultivate that capacity to use your attention on demand. And so that means knowing, the problem I would say for a lot of people that have, I wouldn't say, it doesn't have to be clinically significant ADD, but whatever our set point is on the continuum of attentional capacity. If when we find things not intrinsically interesting and we tend to just wander away and we're not aware of it, there's no hope of getting it back. So it's both that you want to be able to bring your attention forward when you know that it's not going to be intrinsically interesting, but you got to cultivate a different set of muscles to do that. And I think that this is where understanding the kind of full scope of attention could be very useful, because attention is not focus alone. That's only one of its many systems.
Hmm.
We already talked about working memory, and in some sense, working memory is once you've focused, and this is formally called the orienting attention system of attention, sort of like a flashlight. Wherever you direct it, that's where the resources of your brain are going, and that's how they're calibrated. Working memory picks up after that. So I'm focusing on you right now. Right now in my working memory, I'm constantly updating and holding anything you say to me, even the look on your face.
Hmm.
All of that's going into working memory. Still kind of the same system, but there's two other ways that attention works that I think then will give you a sense that, you may feel like you have challenges in one area, but you may be excellent in other areas. That's typically even what we find with patients with ADD. It's not that there's a blanket attentional challenge. It's that the calibration, sort of like a mixing board, a little off. Meaning sometimes the focusing thing is either too high or too low, but the other systems may be fine, or maybe another system is too high or too low in some sense. So that also helps understand that these are just differences people have, and we can work toward being better able to manipulate the levers of our mind in some sense more fluidly, and we can train to do this.
Hmm. Should somebody with attention deficits in a given context try to change their own intrinsic ability to focus, or should they be seeking rather to change the context? Yeah,
Both.
both.
We
Interesting.
can advantage ourselves in both ways. But so let me tell you about the two other systems, because that'll help explain why I just said this, right?
Yeah.
So in addition to this really laser focus, this orienting system, a second way our attention works is almost the exact opposite. It's about being broad and receptive, something we call the alerting system.
Hmm.
And that the metaphor I like to use is like a floodlight. The thing that it cares about, this particular system, is it selects not based on the information, but based on the time. Alerting is for now, like what's most important right now. So you got to be broad and receptive. And the way I think about it is, if you were driving down the street and you see like a yellow light on the side of the road flashing, usually that means, okay, pay attention. You don't know what it is, like construction or children running around. You don't know what it is, but you got to be vigilant and aware and receptive. Very different. And I think oftentimes people that may have trouble focusing can actually read the room a lot better than a lot of other people. They can kind of get the gestalt, or the tone of what's going on in a broader sense. So that's what I meant by they can be complementary. And then the third system, when I say it, you'll be like, oh yeah, of course. And you already know this probably term, executive control. So executive control is not about the focusing or the broadening, it's about the management.
Hmm.
So what are my goals right now? And is my behavior aligned with my goals? And I often talk about it, and it's very much like the executive of a company, right? The executive's job is not to go in there and do every single task, but to kind of broadly oversee and ensure and course correct when there are problems. So, what I think about with the kind of metaphor I like to use for executive control is like a juggler. Just make sure you got to update, you got to inhibit, you got to shift tasks. All that stuff happens in the context of using those two other systems better. So I think that when I was saying, you said, should we change the environment or should we change our mind? I think we can always advantage ourselves by training our mind to be able to flexibly and more strongly and more consistently engage in all three of these functions. But there's such easy things we can do to advantage our environment. So, for example, that flashlight I was talking about, it's great at being directed, but it'll get yanked around. So if we're sitting here and you have every intention, Mishi, my eyes are on you, I'm focusing on you. If you get some alert on your phone and you have a particular sound for a particular kind of alert, you're going to pay attention to it. It's like, oh, I got to check this out. And totally healthy, normal thing for our brain to do, is advantaged and evolutionarily selected to do that. But most alerts are not something you got to orient toward,
Hmm.
especially if you're doing deep work. So turn off the alerts, turn off the notifications, close the extra windows that you don't need. dedicate time, and then as you're doing whatever attentionally demanding task, keep always this broad receptive floodlight aware of where your mind is moment by moment. That's going to give the executive control system a lot more opportunity to say, oh, you're not where you need to be, get back. And that's what I mean by you can advantage your environment and your mind.
It's so true. Like phones exert almost a gravitational pull on attention.
They do.
And phones aren't the only devices, right? Like
No.
or objects. There's books, magazines, so it's even though phones are fairly new in terms of the human historical record. I mean, there have always been things, that when present pull your attention away. So I guess that's very smart advice to curate your environment carefully.
It definitely is, but here's the thing, and it's really funny when you look back at the historic, because I was very curious. When did we start thinking that our attention is not our own, that it's constantly going everywhere? And is it really driven by our technology-rich environment? But you can look back at people from, many, many hundreds of years ago. There's medieval monks that talk about not being able to pay attention to their prayer life because they were preoccupied about lunch or something a family member might have said. And they would go to these extreme measures to cut off ties or, whatever they did didn't work.
Isolate themselves from women,
Well, all of that,
right?
everything they did was to move toward being able to have a more direct spiritual connection with God, and their mind kept interrupting them. So that's the other warning, and that's why I said both, the internal and the external, because even if you clear everything out, you're secluded in a hut in the middle of nowhere, your mind's going to interrupt you. Your mind is going to distract you, and all of this means get more comfortable, befriend your mind, understand your attention at a granular level, not at I tend to be like this or that, but moment to moment. And this is something that we technically in the field of psychology call meta awareness.
Hmm.
So meta meaning toward itself, and awareness really of what's going on right now. And I put it more plainly as pay attention to your attention and train for that.
Pay attention to your attention. I love that. What about impulse control and our tendency towards impulsivity?
Right. That's again, in many ways, executive control, the juggler not being able to kind of ratchet in what's going on.
Hmm.
And think about the last time you felt like there was some impulse control challenge, like simple, innocuous thing. Oftentimes I think of like you're walking into an office. Pre-COVID, this was more often. Now you just don't see this. There's a tray full of candy bars there, right?
Mm.
And then next to it, like a bunch of veggies. And you feel that like war in your brain, like, I just want that candy bar. I just don't feel like having a carrot right now. So typically, especially if you were busy, stressed, and all these things we talked about, stress, threat, poor mood, the chances of you being able to actually resist the candy bar are going to be reduced because we need full fuel in all these gas tanks to be able to function. But if you could catch that impulse more sooner in time, the chances of rerouting may be greater. So if you walk into the room and you say, look at that, Amishi's going to feel the pull of the candy bars. I kind of distance yourself, and Amishi's going to make choices. And I'm talking to myself in the third person, not just to be vain, but because it actually helps distance yourself from the immersion of the pull. Like Misha's going to feel the pull of the candy bar.
So that's an exercise you recommend to actually
decentering. Yes, we can talk about that. This is a very good way to deal with impulse control. Is if you are just I just want that candy bar. I'm sorry, I'm obsessing over candy. I don't really want a candy bar right now anyway. But if you just
trust me, we get it.
If you are just in the pull of the moment, you will have a more difficult time regulating. So any situation in which you're prone to having impulse control challenges, start by that kind of decentered, self-supportive orientation. And I use that, again, it's a technical term, so just to unpack it, another way to say it is take a bird's eye view of the situation. Like you're kind of hovering above, watching your mind, and do it in a very self-supportive manner. Like you're not trying to be punitive, like don't you dare do that. It's more like, this is what's going on right now, like you're a reporter on the sidelines. And when you do that with your own mind, the opportunity for you to intervene is going to increase. And the pull and the what's called cognitive fusion, your linked capacity with that event is going to be diminished. So you could actually have a lot more opportunity to take control.
Wow, I'm going to use that. Like, oh shit, Max is going for his 6th Zollipop. of the day. These are these like sugar-free lollipops that I've been kind of obsessed with.
Ah,
They're supposed to be good for your oral health. I don't know, but I probably eat too many of them. Um, anyway, so that's super interesting. So talking to yourself in third person, I'm really interested in these exercises to help bolster our
yeah,
ability to better connect with our goals, right? And to live a life in with more integrity, you know?
absolutely. We want that. And I think that the main reason I would say, in addition to implementing on the fly in the moment, but to train for it, is the same way you train for your physical excellence, right? Like you're in, I mean, I was thinking about this even coming, flying out to LA, putting my suitcase up on top of the overhead compartment. And, I could do it. I'm like, I've been swimming. I'm feeling better and stronger even after not working out all that much during COVID. And I'm like, you know what? If in this moment I couldn't do that, it would make no sense to just drop to the floor and start doing push ups. Like that would be a bad way to orient to the situation. I had to have this intrinsic capacity to use it now. And the same way goes for our attention, for our mind. If we train for it, we don't know when we're going to need it. And we need to have full access to it so that no matter what, we're on it. We have access to it. And that's where the mindfulness training came in. Because as I was saying earlier, all of these other approaches just didn't have generalizable benefits, but mindfulness training did. So that's what we've been recommending. And then we've been on a hunt in my lab to figure out what's the shortest amount of time we can do this in so it's time efficient for time pressured and performance pressured individuals.
Hmm. Maybe we should walk through some common circumstances that people find themselves in, and perhaps ways that they can ready themselves for optimal cognitive performance in that context. You know, somebody, for example, who's about to give an important presentation at work. How can they prime their mind for a peak mind
Yeah.
in that specific circumstance, and maybe starting with like the morning, like
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm happy to do that, but given what I just said about the importance of training, I want to give at least one training tool because the morning of is going to go a lot better when you have a big thing to do. If you've been preparing and doing this for the long haul leading up to that moment,
hmm,
because the preparatory period matters. And I'll tell you why. So, in the work that we do with these groups like special operations forces, football players, we train the entire University of Miami football team actually.
I hear they have a football team. That's awesome. No, I'm not a sports like dude. My
Well, neither am I. So
Sydney always makes fun of me. But yeah,
you should have seen me trying to deal with a bunch of football players. It was actually quite fun. But what we know is this. Now, I want to tell you this because I think it leads up to the thing that you want, and which most people want is like, show me what to do when I need it, like you know, actionable right now. And I think that we will do that. But I want you to understand, just like the physical fitness analogy, what you could do every day and for not that long. Our research over the last 15 years or so has gotten it down to 12 minutes a day of how much time you need to spend with this type of brain training to advantage and strengthen your attention.
amazing.
So, but I wanted to go back to telling you why this is so important and why high stress circumstances, like giving a big deal talk, or taking a big test, or in the context of our populations, having to perform surgery, or being deployed to a war zone, or it's game day and you better perform. So all of those things, what we know is when you track people over a high demand interval. And by the way, we did this on University of Miami students. What we found was that even over the course of the academic semester, it's a high demand interval. And you know this from your experience. You feel a lot different at the end of the semester than at the beginning of the semester. So over a high demand interval, when we track attention, when we look to see,
Yeah, I get weird spam calls from Miami. Actually, it's very odd. All of the nobody, literally nobody calls me from with a Miami phone number, but then I get these spam calls, and they have a 305 number, and I know that they're spam. So
exactly.
very easy filtering process.
So anyway, so you track people, you bring them into the lab, you have them do a whole attentional battery, and then you say, come back in 8 weeks. And during that, or 4 weeks, and during those weeks intervening, something intense is going on. Either they've got finals and exams and things like that. Not finals, but just exams and regular coursework, or pre-deployment training, or athletic camps, or they're prepping for hurricane season if they're a firefighter. So you get it, like this different high demand, and people can translate that into high demand intervals in their own lives, right? So even if you're preparing for like a big case, you're a lawyer, or a big sales season if you're an entrepreneur, whatever it is. When the demands are intensive and protracted, even over something like 4 weeks, attention significantly declines.
Mhm.
So if you do nothing at all in the preparation for the big day, you've got less attention than you did 4 weeks ago.
Wow. Why? Just because you're just so unprepared?
No, because you are using your attention, and attention is like, we talked about it as fuel.
Mm.
It's a limited resource. The gas tank will get emptied
Wow.
with repeated use. So then the question becomes, if the default of what happens is degradation, reduction in the availability of this fuel, and then at the end of the interval, I got to go do something big, that's not a great scenario to be in. So is there anything that could level this off so I don't see degradation? And, oftentimes you'll hear the term resilience, like bounce back from adversity or bounce back from a challenge. What I was interested in was really presilience. Like, you don't even need resilience. You just protect against it, stay stable, and keep staying stable over time, which seemed like a fantasy in some sense. Like, can you actually even do that? And that's what I was interested in. So in the first set of studies that we did, offering mindfulness training and comparing it to nothing at all, it was pretty straightforward. Like, we were seeing, and it was a surprise to us in some sense because this was not regular people. This was pre-deployment Marines. And we had something like 24 hours of formal training time. We asked them to do 30 minutes a day of mindfulness practice, and we can talk about the specific examples of the practices they got. But what shocked me is that if we gave them nothing at all, the subgroup of Marines that got nothing, definitely significant decline. From the people that got the training, as a group, they actually weren't that impressive, because what we noticed, surprise, surprise, is like most of them, not most of them, about half of them totally disregarded us, didn't do any of the practices. They'd show up to class, but they were pretty much checked out.
Hmm.
So we're like, you know what? Just seeing if they're in the group that was receiving mindfulness training is not a good way to go, because there's so much variability in their engagement. Just like signing up for an exercise program and then never leaving your couch.
Hmm.
Just signing up isn't enough. So we looked to see how much they were actually practicing, and we found there that gave us gold. There was a dose response effect. The more people practiced, the more they benefited. And there was something like a minimum effective dose. At that point, about 12 minutes a day or more, people benefited. They stayed stable over time. And if they did a lot, they actually increased over time in terms of their attention. People that did less than 12 minutes, not a lot of benefit. In fact, they looked just like the no training group. So this gave us clues, like there are ways we can actually level off and keep attention stable. And just like physical exercise, the more you do, the more you can benefit.
I love the term they used, presilience.
Yeah.
That's amazing. No, but you're so right. It's like we spend all this time training in the gym, bolstering, building up our physical fitness. For what? It's so that that when the day comes, we're exposed to a pathogen, we are more resilient. Our immune systems are more robust, right?
Yeah.
So I love how you've applied the same concept to attention and the mental, challenges that inevitably are going to pop up in our day-to-day lives. So talk to me about the regiment. Like, what is
Yes.
this
So
12-minute routine?
exactly. So let's just start with sort of one of the most foundational practices that we have, and that's part of mindfulness. I didn't invent, right? It's part of the world's wisdom traditions. It's been around for thousands of years, and bringing it to the modern age has been around for about half a century, 55 years or so of research on mindfulness. What people have done, people like a, a teacher and friend of mine, John Kabat-Zinn, has taken sort of the traditions and brought it into a context where there's no requirement for a particular worldview, but the core practices are offered. And what he did is he offered an 8-week program, and it has one of these practices that I'm about to describe to you. But I think the key to this is that it really is brain training. And I was approaching it from the neuroscience perspective to see what's the workout, exactly the question you're asking, and how much of the workout do people need to do? And that's where we came to 12 minutes. So, but when I started looking a little bit more deeply, I was starting to connect the dots between my expertise in attention and what mindfulness exercises are actually asking us to do. And I do think it helps to kind of understand or orient in that way. So, one very common one is something called just mindfulness of breathing, but I actually refer to it as the find your flashlight practice.
Mm.
Because to me, it's not so much about the breath. It's not actually. It could be anything. You could focus on your big toe if you want to. I don't care. It's about what your attention is doing and advantaging your ability to find out what your attention is doing. So in the practice, and I'll just go through it, you don't have to do it right now, but just to kind of name it. So you sit in comfortable, upright posture, really like you were saying earlier, advantage the environment. Don't be in the middle of a busy coffee shop with like your all your devices around and people talking to you. Quiet, supportive, and then commit to some period of time you're going to do this. I would recommend starting really low dose, 1 minute, maybe 30 seconds, and notice yourself just sitting and breathing. And you can close or lower your eyes if that's more comfortable to kind of reduce the environmental input. And you want to really take a posture. It doesn't, you don't have to sit on a special mat or anything. You're not going to start levitating, but the key is that you take the posture of sort of dignified presence. This is an exercise in waking up and about having more capacity. So upright, but not really uptight. You're not trying to control yourself. And then you notice yourself breathing, and then pick something prominent related to breathing. So it could be the coolness of air moving in and out of your nostrils, or maybe you notice something in your back. Wherever it is for you, you're going to make that the target for your attention. And then for the whole period of time you've committed to doing this, that's where you want to shine the flashlight. Just keep your focus right there. And it's hard to do. It's just like first you got to figure out where it is, and then you got to set the flashlight there. But that's the goal. That's the executive control saying your goal for this period of time is to keep the flashlight on that attentional target. Then next step, so it's like focus is the first step.
Well, I'm not an expert in meditation, but I was trained in the Vedic style of meditation, and it sounds identical to Vedic
It's
meditation
the same
practice.
thing.
With Vedic meditation, you're just focusing on a mantra that they give you.
So let's go to the next step, because I think that it very much will align with transcendental meditation, other forms of what we call concentrative practice. So, and there is nothing special about this. Like I said, the only difference would be whereas the mantra may be tied to the traditions, maybe potentially Hindu or other traditions, right? Vedic is definitely Hindu. When you're focusing on your breath, that's not part of any particular worldview. Everybody's got a breath. So it opens it up in ways for people that may not want to have a particular Sanskrit phrase that they repeat over and over again. It invites more people in, and it doesn't take away from anything that other people are doing that may be focusing on a mantra instead.
Hmm.
So I just wanted to say, is this in the spirit of inclusivity and flexibility for various people? So anyway, so that you're focusing on your target. Now that could be your mantra, that could be your breath related sensation. But the reason I would say try the breath if you have another way that you're doing this is because the breath is changing moment by moment. You're not having to create anything. You're not having to generate anything or repeat it even in your working memory. It's just happening. And it's changing. It's got a changing nature and you're with it. So you're not controlling the breath. This is not pranayama. This is not breath manipulation, which is a great thing to do. These are all great things to do. This is taking an observational stance toward something that is already transpiring and just focusing in on it with specificity, like a laser. Like it's this particular point on my nose that I'm going to focus in on.
Hmm.
The next moment, the next sort of aspect of the instruction after it's about focusing is noticing. Keep that that floodlight broad and receptive. You're on this sort of monitoring mission. You got the flashlight going, monitoring, monitoring, monitoring. When you notice that your mind has wandered, take the flashlight, gently return it back, just like you would for any other object, right? Whether it's a mantra, etc. So I hope that it's you can see the dots getting connected here. You've got the flashlight engaged. You've got the floodlight working to ensure receptivity. You've got the juggler or the executive control getting you back on track. So with each with each repetition of that, you're just exercising all three systems. And what I think that is exciting about this is you're not only exercising them individually, you're exercising their coordination. And that can really be powerful. Now, this practice is one of the 12-minute practices that we offer, but then there are other practices, and I don't think we'll have time to go through all of them, but would emphasize just the floodlight. You're going to train the floodlight. It's a different kind of orientation. This is where probably a lot of Vedic and transcendental approaches and mindfulness may diverge, because mindfulness is really about paying attention to our present moment experience without this editorializing or reactivity aspect to it. So that's going to be the focus of the next set of exercises people do.
Wow. So you do these basically, would you say every day?
12 minutes a day.
12 minutes a day.
Yeah. 3 to 5 days a week, we start seeing benefits.
3 to 5? 3 to 5?
Yeah.
Wow. That's incredible. Um, And these generally, like, what populations is it just a general population that you've seen success in, or is it
So
like
because we saw benefits in probably groups that I didn't think we would, like our initial studies, I was like, because it was the first time we ever brought mindfulness practices into the laboratory to interrogate with the gold standard of research with attention. Like this has been around for thousands of years, but to interrogate them, meaning examine them with a randomized controlled trial where some people get the training versus not. This is all new. So the very first studies I did, I was like, I'm not willing to just put it out there and see what happens. Let me go to where I think the chances of seeing something, if it's real, are going to be really high. So we actually didn't start with the randomized trial. What we did is we started with maybe not quite Olympic level, but probably like marathon runner level meditators. So we partnered with this retreat center in Colorado where people were going to be practicing mindfulness
Hmm.
for 10 to 12 hours a day for a month. And I said, if there's a tractable chance, if I can actually pick this up with my metrics, I should see it here. If I don't see it here, there's probably not a lot of chance that I'm going to see it other places. And so we gave these same experiments that I was telling you about with the soldiers and football players, et cetera, but we gave them to people. We took our laptops to the retreat center, tested these people, came back a month later, tested them again, and then we found sort of age and education matched controls that didn't go on retreat. And that showed significant and strong effects. So I'm like, okay, I think our metrics are sensitive. They're picking this up. Because remember that whole thing I told you about generalizability? We had no idea, even though on paper, reading the descriptions of these practices and even practicing myself, I got the sense this is definitely tapping into attention. I had no idea if it'd be generalizable. Can you go from focusing on your breath quietly by yourself and now look at a computer screen with different lights and stimuli appearing and find benefits? It requires a transfer, right, of one skill set to another context. So that was exciting to see it. But then we kind of went almost in the other direction. I'm like, what's the most challenging circumstances in which I'm probably not going to see something
Hmm.
unless it's a robust signal and the amount of time that people are practicing is enough? And that was looking at medical and nursing students and then off to pre-deployment soldiers and special operators where they're about to enter a war zone and lots going on. And if you do nothing at all, you definitely see degradation. But even in those individuals, we saw beneficial effects. So we have broadened out this from sort of elite level to high demand to now everyday people. So, working with, for example, military spouses who are not being deployed, but they're in an intensive environment. Or we just did we just did a partnership project with a local company that does accounting. Everybody in the company got access to this, or a real estate company. So we're broadening out. In fact, there's a project we're doing with the city of Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where the former mayor has offered it to the entire community.
Wow.
And when we track it, we see all walks of life. People do these practices 12 to 15 minutes a day, 3 to 5 days a week. They are experiencing beneficial effects.
So cool. Is there anything that you could do morning of or
Yeah,
right
yeah, yeah,
before,
yeah.
like
Good,
to
good connect.
like a booster shot?
Exactly. So one of the things I would say is if you got something big on the morning of, maybe do more than 12 minutes. It sounds counterintuitive.
Hmm.
And I noticed this even, writing this book. As I was writing the book, you'd feel the pressure, you'd feel the confusion, the exhaustion. I'm like, instead of doing less because I feel time pressured, what if I just did a few minutes more? And I felt like I kind of felt better doing, sometimes I'd like be like, I'm going to do a double dose today
Wow.
and it would help. So, but that's if you have the time, right? But literally it's the morning of you're like prepping, sitting on the sidelines and, whatever it is, giving a talk or doing whatever intensive activity you're about to do. One thing I suggest is something called a stop practice, which is almost like a mini practice tied to everything we just talked about with mindfulness training. Very simple because the momentum of your mind is going to be strong when there's a high pressure event occurring, right? It's like the anticipation, the worry, maybe even reflecting on the last time you did something similar. So the stop practice, the first step is just very straightforward. Stop. Like whatever's going on, the momentum of your mind and your body physically stop. It's a great thing to do, by the way, if you're driving and you see a stop sign. Stop. The next step, T, S is for stop. T, take a breath. And that means just allow the breath to occur, but you're really experiencing it. You're really there for it. O, observe. And that's now orient back to, you're not focusing on the breath anymore. Just what's going on around you, within you. Proceed. And what you did in that moment is essentially you got your flashlight back, no matter where it was. You got it now. And then you can use it with more efficiency.
Wow. What does stop stand for again? Just real quick.
Stop,
Yeah.
take a breath, T, O, observe, P, proceed.
Stop, take a breath, observe, proceed.
Yeah.
I love that. Where do stimulants fall into the recommendation? Like, um, I'm off caffeine. A lot of people
Wow.
self-medicate. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's one of the best decisions I've ever made, honestly.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We
Did you
could
feel that way in the first couple weeks?
No, it took me a few. I mean, you probably know a lot more about the pharmacology of caffeine than I do, but what I know subjectively is that it took me only like 3, 4 days
Hmm,
of just fatigue, feeling like I was kind of moving underwater to feel like I was off of it. Um, but yeah, I mean, when doing these practices in the morning, I mean, do you recommend doing the practices before, after? Because many people do start their mornings with a cup of coffee.
yeah. What I would say is this, especially because you're going to be introducing something new to your life, take it slow and don't try to do multiple changes at once. So if you're on a caffeine extraction mission, don't introduce mindfulness at the same time. So let's say people actually already drink a cup of coffee. I don't want you to change that, at least initially for this particular aspect. The short answer to your question of when to do this is you want to do it when you're actually going to do it.
Mm,
Like, it doesn't matter. We could talk around this in circles, but really you need to play around with this in your own life so that you're actually accomplishing this 12-minute goal. And what I know works, what I know helps is attaching it to something you already have in your routine. So going back to what you were saying about a morning cup of coffee, what have we've heard reports of from people from our many studies is if they practice because they know they're going to have a morning cup of coffee right before they have it, they actually enjoy the cup of coffee more. They don't feel like they're mindlessly pouring another cup and kind of amping themselves up. They actually savor. And if they do it right after, same thing. It's just like they feel a little bit more integrated into their day moving forward. So a lot of times people will do it right before or after brushing their teeth. And even notice like use the mindfulness approach when they're brushing their teeth. I'm sure none of us, I'm sure everybody that's probably listening at some point in the last 24 hours has brushed their teeth. Probably didn't notice the
you'd hope.
tingly. You'd hope. Let's just put it out there that this is a positive thing everybody's doing for their well-being. Most of us have no memory of doing this, and we certainly didn't experience a tingling peppermint or whatever sensation. We missed it. And that's, really that's an important thing. Like we're missing a lot because we're just not there. Our mind is somewhere else. And it's not like it's going to be the most joy-filled thing, but try it out. See what it feels like to be in any moment and actually be in it. But anyway, so just to say that it is a good idea to yoke it to whatever habits you already have, and then start really slow. So if you think work up to 12 minutes, but if you think you can do 3 minutes, do 1 minute and give yourself that real boost of a win when you accomplish it. Now, just to get back to granular aspects of the practice I described, even the stop practice, most people, when they start on this journey with mindfulness or transcendental meditation, they get super frustrated because, like, my mind is really busy and I wander a lot. I can't do this. I cannot stay focused. But think back to the instruction I gave. It was focus on breath related sensations. When you notice your mind wander, it's like, I'm not saying if you happen to be one of those weirdos whose mind wanders a lot, everybody's mind wanders. In fact, it wanders about 50% of our waking moments. It's normative, it's healthy, our brains were built for this distractibility. The win is when you notice it. So get that kind of orientation toward your practice and really your life. Anytime you notice that you've been lost and you come back, think of it as a win. Like, oh, I'm back. I'm holding the flashlight again. That's really good. So anyway, I know that was a little bit of a digression, but what I would say is start slow, yoke it to a practice. Try to integrate multiple moments of this throughout. I would say anytime you're at a stop sign
Mm.
or waiting for anything, even if you're waiting for an elevator, waiting in line, let's see what happens if you don't pull out your phone and just be there. Like actually be there and try it for a few moments every day. But make a commitment to yourself and then stay with it, like any kind of good routine or even an exercise routine.
I think it's also really smart. You said that people who drink coffee after this practice tend to really enjoy it, or they
Yeah.
see a potentiated boost to
Yeah.
their. I think it's really wise to build into your routine something before the morning coffee, because
Hmm.
so frequently we rush to the kitchen, pour ourselves a cup immediately after waking up. And we have this diurnal circadian cortisol spike in the morning, which lasts for 45 minutes to an hour after we wake up. And I just think that putting caffeine into that hormonal milieu is never a good idea. So it's always, I think, always smart to give yourself a little bit of time in the morning before you reach for the cup of coffee. And of course, nobody listening to this is actually going to do that, but it's smart. It's good advice to.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that people are going to be at different stages of accepting your words of wisdom. But this might give them another activity to do that's in the service of their wellness.
I love that. So we've talked about exercises that people can do. What about from a nutritional standpoint? Is there anything that's come across your desk? Any research that um, has been convincing to you that whether it's micronutrients or foods or what have you can also play a supportive role to our focus and attention?
Yeah, I'm gonna tell you that that's not an area that we look at. And part of the reason is just it hasn't been a big part of our
Hmm.
approach. And because my interest in as a brain scientist was to be able to track neuroplastic changes, structural and functional changes in the brain based on something people do, I have to engage in practices that require people to do something differently and with regularity to track it. So it's unfortunately not something I'm going to be able to say much about.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you are what you repeatedly do. And so these exercises are very empowering.
Yeah, yeah. And really, this is another thing to, and a kind of an insight. There are two sort of things I think I'd want people to keep in mind. One goes back to that bird's eye view we were talking about when we started our conversation. Remember that thoughts are not facts, and your mind will pump out lots and lots of thoughts. And if you take that kind of an orientation, you can watch the thoughts come up without necessarily already believing them to be true. So that gives you a lot more flexibility. And the second is that really what you pay attention to is your life.
Hmm.
It becomes the central focus of your conscious experience, and not to take it lightly. I mean, what you are filling your mind with, whether that's rumination or worry, catastrophizing, or trying to build up some, positivity, that's going to be what is remembered and what is experienced in your life. And it's so useful to kind of really value and respect this capacity because we have many more choice points. And I think our sense of fulfillment increases when we respect it.
I agree. I mean, your brain functions probably very much like the Instagram algorithm. What you pay attention to tends to get uh
I love that.
tends to get featured.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it's true. I mean, Instagram knows that, right? And
Well,
all these social
absolutely.
media apps know that.
Yeah.
But it traces back probably something to something very uh fundamental
Well,
in terms of like our neuropsychology.
taking it even deeper, the thing the Instagram algorithm is tapping into is your attention. It is dialed in perfectly, customized to you. The reason that it's doing that is to lure you in. And that's essentially what we mean by commodifying our attention. It's the product. So it's not that it's doing that and it's similar, it's that it's harnessing your attention. And to be aware of that too.
Yeah. Put your attention towards things that are supportive of your best self. What you appreciate appreciates.
Exactly. I like that. I like that a lot. And the other thing to know is that sometimes, going back to attention and working memory, don't push against the reality of a situation with the allure of positivity. So, what I mean by that is, and we know this also because in those same studies where we offered mindfulness training, often we'd offer something else to compare because we didn't know initially. It's like, well, we give them nothing and then they were worse. But when we give them something, they were protected. What if I gave them spa vacations? What if I told them to, you know, pat their stomach 5 times and rub their head? Like, we don't know if just doing anything at all would be effective. So what we compared it to were things like positivity and relaxation training, positive visualization in various studies. And we did this because performance psychology suggests these are really powerful things to do, beneficial things for people to do, especially athletes. And we wanted to know, that's probably that we know from the data that that's correct. Positive psychology is beneficial, relaxation beneficial, visualization beneficial, but nobody had really put it to the test in the context of a protracted high stress interval, right? So is it just as beneficial under those circumstances? And what we found was no, it's not. In fact, it's almost worse than doing nothing at all.
Hmm.
And that was a real like wake up call too, because um, well, then I shouldn't be doing it, even if I'm taught to do it during steady state and everything's good, or at least stable in my life and it benefits me. I should not probably be doing the same kinds of things if I'm under a protracted period of stress. Knowing that is really useful information. The question became, why is it not helping people under these high stress circumstances? And the reason is back to attention. We need our attention and our working memory to reframe situations, to see the good, to see the positive, to actually actively relax, to visualize when that fuel is already getting depleted and you're pressing on that gas tank to make these castles in the sky in some sense, you're depleting yourself further.
Hmm.
So you need an approach, and that's where mindfulness we think is probably helpful. It's not asking you to spend out more attention. In fact, taking that observational stance to notice what's actually occurring, very helpful. I'm not having to do anything extra in terms of a cognitive manipulation of my mind. So I think, and I just want to say this because oftentimes people think, oh, yeah, mindfulness, yeah, I should be blissed out by the end of this, right? Or any kind of meditation, especially like over the pandemic, I'd get a lot of questions like, how do I use mindfulness to crush it and to feel awesome?
Hmm.
And I'm like, maybe don't do that. Like, don't try to crush it. Just be okay. Notice what's actually happening. And a lot of times in the search for wanting to focus on what's positive, we miss so many opportunities to actually advantage our lives. And sometimes that means going deep and shining the flashlight on difficulty, sadness, stress to really more wholly rework our lives for our betterment.
Couldn't agree more. There's this concept that I've come across online: toxic positivity.
Oh, yeah, for
Is that a
sure.
thing?
I mean, I think it's tapping into what I'm talking about. And a lot of the soldiers would say this to us, ma'am, my buddy getting his arm blown off, there's nothing good I can see in this. Don't
Right.
make me do that. And I could not agree more. If you can't see, if you need to twist and turn everything into something good, I think you're fooling yourself. It's okay that some things in life, because it's life, are what they are. They may not be good, they may not be bad. They may be good or bad, or they just may be. And if we can take that kind of orientation of being okay no matter what's occurring, a kind of a mental toughness of being able to withstand everything with a steadiness, that's a much better point of power in our lives.
I love this. Do you ever do cold plunges? Is that part
I
of your
haven't,
routine?
no, I have not done that. That sounds interesting.
They do. Well, they bolster presilience.
Ah,
Yeah, I find that with exercise, sauna, cold water immersion, stressors, physical stressors
yeah,
on the body, there is a spillover effect, and it tends to make me more psychologically resilient. The
awesome.
mind body connection is something that I think is really underappreciated.
Hmm.
Because we're talking about what you can do from the standpoint of the mind, like through
Hmm.
the lens of the mind, to enhance the way that your mind works. But there are also things that you can do seemingly, um, in the literature, there's now data that, that are physical in
Yeah.
nature that can also affect the way that the mind functions.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think that as there's more research, we'll have a much more robust repertoire of things we can do to help ourselves. And what I'm interested in addition to that, I think is all great. I'm going to add it to my toolkit whenever I live in Miami, so cold plunges are not something I'm going to have a lot of access to,
But you
except for certain places I can go to do it. I
probably
know.
really enjoy though in the summer in
Yeah.
Miami.
Oh God. Yeah.
Do you live there full all year
I
round?
do. I'm a professor at the University of Miami. They don't let us get too far away. But I was going to say one other thing about this because I do think it's the preparatory period is one thing, but you really nailed it on the head when you said, "What about when I'm about to go do something, or I am doing something very important or consequential? How do I bring this to that moment?" And oftentimes I'll get asked, like, my breath is so boring. Can I just focus on something else? Like maybe I'll just do mindfulness while I'm running or some other active activity. And is that a good thing to do? And I'll say, go for it, do it, apply it. You're exercising that muscle in the context of many different things, but take some time every day to do it with stillness where there's no other activity going on. And the reason for that is it's almost like the super high end challenge of mindfulness, because the fact that we're calling the breath boring or whatever the stimulus is that you focus on, boring is a feedback system. Essentially, what it's tapping into is this notion that it wants to activate the mind and body to take action different from what it's currently acting in. So it's data, but it doesn't necessarily mean you got to take that data and do something with it. It's not anything intrinsic about the situation. It's basically an opportunity cost kind of concept.
Hmm.
And so if you feel bored, it's usually like something about this scenario is making your mind body system say, there's other alternatives, maybe go pursue those. And in life, there are times when you can't go pursue something else. It'll either be boring or terrifying or annoying or confusing or difficult, and you got to be in it anyway. And so, what it provides because of that boredom or whatever it is, when you quietly do this as a stillness practice, is a hardiness that says no matter what's transpiring, I can be fully here with it. If boredom is appearing, I can say, Amisha's experiencing boredom right now. Take the flashlight, get back to the breath. It's here. Or oftentimes, it might be something like a worry or sadness that shows up in your practice or in your life, and it feels like it derails everything. Like or anger. I'm just so angry. I can't do anything. I can't think. What if you could orient your life where anger is there? You're not denying it. You're not even trying to reframe it. You're not trying to look on the upside. You're just with it. It's there like a friend, not a nice friend, but a friend that's there. Not then it doesn't have to interfere with what happens next. And the reason I bring this up of why you should consider stillness practices is because the next time you're in a high stress moment or a high consequence moment or in a heated interaction with somebody, a spouse, a loved one, somebody you care for, going for a run is not going to be the solution.
Hmm.
You know, going for even a cold jump in a bath of ice water is not going to be a solution. You got to just be there for it. So, how can you bring all of your capacity to be fully present to that moment? That I think is the strongest test of our mental capacity. That's what I mean by peak mind. You can be with whatever the heck is happening with a toughness and frankly a self-supportive softness to sustain yourself and advantage your life.
Without feeling the need to hit the eject button.
Exactly. Or if you feel the need, you're there anyway.
Yeah. Is it true that like before a performance or a test, you don't want to abolish all stress and anxiety, right? Isn't there a
Mhm.
certain level of stress, anxiety
Yeah.
that you feel that actually has a performance boosting effect?
It's such a great question. The first time I ever went into a room of like big brawny dudes, I think it was Marines, but I mean, I've had a very similar challenge with firefighters and, all these people that you'd be surprised when a 5'2" Indian woman walks into the room, they get like severely dysregulated. But it was like, ma'am, stress is an activator. I disagree with you, and I'm just like, ah, but they're so right. And you're so right. So it ends up that stress, and we've been using it as this blanket term. What I really mean is perceived distress.
Hmm.
So let me describe, and when I say this, you're probably like, yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. But formally, it's something called the Yerkes-Dodson law. Now, you were a psychology major. You didn't hear about a lot of laws. In physics, you might hear about a lot of laws. This is so reliable and happens with so much regularity and repeatability that we call it a law. And so, what is the Yerkes-Dodson law? Essentially, think of it as a graph with a U turned upside down. So, not our University of Miami U, but turned upside down. And what it's saying is on the x axis, you've got stress, meaning the amount of challenge you experience. And on the y axis is your performance. So the upside, as you're thinking about that upside down U, as the stress level increases, meaning the demand, and I always think of this as like, undergrads that have a term paper due in 8 weeks, like they're not on it like that moment. As the challenge increases, the performance starts to increase.
Hmm.
And there's a sweet spot. It's like, this is the right amount of challenge for me to feel activated, and my performance shows that activation, that benefit. And then there's the downside too. So everything we've been talking about is the downside of the curve.
Hmm.
And here's the other important thing to think about, and I think a lot of people don't realize this. In fact, none of our studies, when we reported back to the Army, what we found that pre-deployment training actually makes people worse in their attention. They're like, what? We didn't think that. Even if you know what that sweet spot is, and most of us do, it's like, I know when I'm tipping to distress, and I know when I feel like, good, this is the right amount of, yeah, I'm activated, like those guys said to me. If you experience that same level of stress over a longer period of time, no matter what, you're going to start dipping into distress. It cannot be sustained at that level. So let's say you have some big event and okay, I'm in the zone, I got it. If you got another event the next day, or the next day, and the next day, and the next day, it's not the same zone anymore. You got to take care of the fact that you're shifting on that stress level. And to, first of all, just empowering yourself with that knowledge. Like, what I might need now is not the same thing I needed 3 days ago when I did this also.
Hmm.
And that may mean, like I was doing for myself, even when I was writing the book, I want to double my practice time. Let's see how that feels. And it helps. It actually does help.
Super interesting. So what are the wrong kinds of stress? Then you said perceived threat. So to go into a given circumstance, but knowing that you're not being threatened. So just knowing.
Oh, this is really a good point. These are not wrong types of stresses. These are the kinds of things that are going to deplete you. Like, you may not be able to overcome this, but to know that is the first point of power, right? So for example, let's just talk about perceived threat, like perceived stress and perceived threat. So what is an example of perceived threat? Let's just think of like a kind of an innocuous one, like stereotype threat. So I see you and I think, oh, he's going to be awesome at X, Y, or Z. That might not seem like a threatening perception, but I think you're going to be awesome. And that will maybe potentially preoccupy you because you feel a pressure based on my expectation of you.
Hmm.
Or the opposite, where I'm like, oh, he's going to be terrible at this. There's no way he's going to be able to do this linear algebra thing. And you're holding that in your mind. It's not about my view of you. The only reason I'm saying it is because it's perceived because you think another is perceiving it in you. It's a type of social threat, but you are holding that threat in your mind. And remember back to when we were talking about the working memory whiteboard, it's cluttering that whiteboard.
Hmm.
There's so much preoccupation regarding that threat that there's no space to do anything else. And then it's important to say that that kind of threat can occur when it's overly positive or overly negative, and it's simply because it's preoccupying you. So unfortunately, I wish I could say, yeah, abolish stress, threat, and poor mood in your life, and everything will be great. We cannot. But to understand that they have this impact on us, we can adjust either the circumstances or our mind to better maneuver through.
I love it. So sort of like a mantra could be like, I'm going into this environment, but I know that regardless of the outcome, I'll be okay. I'll be safe. Is that sort of
You can
a good
definitely,
takeaway?
you can do that. You can do that. But I would say, I will be capable of being with whatever occurs.
Hmm.
I am here for whatever occurs.
I like
I
that.
would not even say you're going to vision that it's all going to be rainbows and unicorns or whatever. Just, I'm here. And I mean, I'll tell you, like, this is the thing that surprised me the most in my own mindfulness practice. It's that feeling of, I'm not going anywhere. And it's like, bring it, almost feeling like Teflon or something, like, I'm fine. And you can do a lot with that kind of an orientation. I had no, it could be still a devastating situation, heartbreaking situation, painful situation, but there's a steadiness of mind that actually allows me to be more able and more willing to be engaged.
Hmm.
And I'll tell you, like, in the interpersonal domain, this shows up a lot for me. I mean, I'm a professor. I've had definitely people come into my office in tears about whatever or some difficulty or they're confused. I'm right here. Like, and I will not I have less challenge bringing up things that will bring about difficulty.
Wow. I love this. So interesting. Your work is so important. Um, that's also how incidentally I go into podcasts. I'm like, you got this, Max. It helps. It's like you're occasioning confidence. You might not necessarily be the most confident person, but you can make yourself. You can kind of like, yeah, you can act your way into a new state of mind.
But yeah, but what I'm saying, just being the recipient of your podcasting skills, is no matter what I say, you're totally there. Like, you're with me. You're attuned, and you're not gonna back away from something or lean too far into something. You're just that presence that you hold. That you got this is, I'm here for it. I'm fully here. I couldn't be more here. So whatever transpires, I will be with it, and that, I think, is the power that successful people have.
Love it. I was not great academically, but my teachers always loved me because they said that I asked good questions.
I agree.
So I really found the perfect career for me.
You did.
Um, they say that people with ADD, ADHD tend to gravitate actually towards more entrepreneurial career paths.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it is the nature of, I think that's probably true, right? And in some sense, there's a lot of debate right now regarding the evolutionary advantages of why we have people that have certain forms of what we might call attentional dysregulation.
Yeah.
They're always the edge of any social group. The edge meaning they're more likely to take risks. I mean, I'm saying they. In fact, it's aspects of all of us. But certain qualities of attention, either hyper focus, hyper broad receptivity, or even sometimes a lack of goal setting brings the new in a way that the rigidity and control may not allow for. So I think that's absolutely true. I mean, we did a study once with mindfulness training with adults with ADD, and it was not what I expected. I mean, you were mentioning stimulants a while ago. We told people, do not get off anything that you're currently taking, stay on it, and then participate in this training program. Now, the first thing to say is we didn't jump into this 12 minutes a day. We started out with very active practices. We didn't actually even start with stillness practices. That was the end point. So it was be like walking, mindfulness is walking practice, for example, or a body scan where you're checking out what's going on in the body. There's all these other kinds. We might even do mindful eating, like you're going to take your meal and take every bite and fully taste it. So these active practices really helped. We started with a minute and worked up. And then at the end of the training, I was able to kind of get to know some of the people and talk to them. And the things they said were quite surprising to me. It was, because I actually even asked about their medication use. I said, did you see any change in your medication use? And the answer was, we told them not to. But the kinds of things that they said were, now when I take my Adderall, usually at that point, actually it might have been pre-Adderall, whatever it was, Ritalin, I don't take it and then end up with 8 hours on the couch really being awesome at video game playing. I actually have the awareness to think, what do I want to do right now? How can I use what I have in front of me to do that? And I'm aware when I'm getting sidelined, I can come back. That to me was exciting. And the other thing I was going to tell you, back to your point about the value of ADD, I got so many creative gifts. I mean, like I've
Wow.
never seen before, paintings, poems, like, and I'm like, we don't want to ever lose this aspect of our humanity. We don't want to squash the presence of people that have a different attentional profile. But when it causes suffering, when people feel like they can't get their lives together, we want to advantage them. And what the tool we gave them was not to now hyper focus, it was to be more, back to that term, meta aware. When they
Hmm.
knew what was going on and they checked in with themselves more often, they could choose to, stay off track if they wanted to or get back on track if they chose to.
Yeah, I mean, I think like we say we talk in terms of like a deficit of attention, but I think it's only a deficit in the context of again like an education paradigm that just sucks when it comes to bending towards the unique neurodivergent needs of people with different like learning styles, for
Yeah.
example. But somebody with ADD would have been such an amazing hunter gatherer, right?
Or explorer.
Or an explorer.
Or frankly, somebody that was excellent at trade and meeting new people and figuring out new
I
solutions.
mean, think about we're not doing much exploring in terms of geography today, but our greatest innovators
Hmm.
in terms of technology probably there's probably an overwhelming proportion of Silicon Valley you know innovators, inventors, technologists, what have you, that have ADD that struggled in school.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that's probably
What is
very
that
true.
saying? The as a teacher, you're probably not going to like this, but the A students end up working for the B students or the C students, something like that. I heard that for the first time when I was in college, and I took comfort in it.
I mean, I think the key is that these different aspects and different ways of orienting need to be valued. They need to be appreciated. And then when it feels dysfunctional, when it feels stressful, when people themselves feel like I'm not happy with the way my mind is functioning right now, to give tools to get back on track. It doesn't mean dissolve your intrinsic capacity, but arm people so that they feel like they're better able to lead their lives in the way they want.
Hey guys, if you enjoyed that conversation, you're going to love this one.
We understand things based on symbols, metaphors, relating things, something we don't know to something we already know. Right? It's a great way of hacking your learning. And the metaphor I was using is that of a butterfly. And I feel like a butterfly is a profound symbol of transformation, right? And while the beauty is in the butterfly, a lot of growth happens in the cocoon. And I think a lot of times, people the past couple of years, they feel like they've been cocooning, right? They've been physically distancing themselves. They might be working remotely or learning, from home. They might be alone with their doubts. They might be alone with their fears. There's a lot of fear out there. And they might be feeling lonely, and mental health is a big challenge. So in Limitless, I have a quote from a French philosopher, and he says life is the C between B and D, which is interesting. Life is C between B and D, and B stands for birth, D stands for death, life, C, choice. I really do believe that these difficult times, they could define us. These difficult times can diminish us, or these difficult times could actually develop us. We decide. We always decide on our choices. We could decide on our thoughts. We could decide on our behaviors. We could decide on what experiences mean. We could decide on how we want to feel more often. We certainly could decide what we put in our mind and in our body also as well, how we move our body. And just reminding people. So there are about 5 or 6 choices. Just I want to remind everybody, who's listening, that you could make to come out of this cocoon stronger, so that you could potentially even soar to new heights, right? I'll make them all C's because I tend to alliterate everything just to make it a little bit more memorable. I'm kind of OCD like that. And then we could chat about it. The first one, I think, in no specific order, the first C is clarity. I think solitude is a wonderful time for self-reflection. I don't think, I think self-awareness is a superpower, and we don't, always in society when we're going 100 miles an hour, we don't take time and just kind of check in with ourselves, in terms of, one of the clarifying questions I love: what's most important to you in blank? What's most important to you in life? What's most important to you in a career? What's most important to you, if in zero-based thinking, if we're, with everything going on, if you're to start over, what's most important to you in a relationship, in your personal contribution, in your health, right? So that gives us some values, because sometimes, again, there's a great book called Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, which is a classic by Dr. Stephen Covey. He says, you don't want to climb the ladder of success, get to the top and realize it's leaning on the wrong wall, right? And the second clarifying question, I think, besides what's most important to you in these areas, and which I would encourage everyone to use this time to do, is are my actions today, align with those values? Are they supporting, that direction? Meaning, a lot of people, I'm sure, who are listening or watching on YouTube, that they feel like burnt out. They feel mentally exhausted, right? And they think it's because they're doing too much. And while that might be a contributing factor, I find that sometimes we feel burnt out not because we're doing too much, but because we're doing too little of the things that make us come alive. You know what I mean? And so those are the things that we're kind of pinpointing our target, our true north, what's most important to us in these areas, and our daily activities, leading us there. That's clarity. The second C, I would say, which, your podcast covers in so well, is care. We know that self-care is not selfish. And I don't just mean, eating the best, amazing foods ever and optimizing our sleep. I also mean, like, part of self-care is putting borders and boundaries around the things that are important to us, and also being conscious and standing guard to our mind of what we're letting inside. Meaning, we know when we're talking about the brain that with media, it's interesting. There's an algorithm kind of like with our mind, like there is with Instagram or any social media. The algorithm primarily is whatever you engage with the most, you're gonna get more of. Right. So if you watch your cat videos and cat posts, you're engaging and you're sharing cats, you're liking it, commenting on cat posts, then the algorithm shows you more cats, right?
Guilty, yes.
Right. And then also, but our mind has a similar algorithm. And if we're just watching like the news and what's, on social media, dark, threatening, scary and fearful because our amygdala is getting hijacked. If it bleeds, it leads, that whole thing. We have to be very conscious, because if that's what we're engaging with, then our our mind's algorithm is going to, the filter, because we could pay attention to a billion different stimuli. Primarily, I think our brain deletes more, right? Otherwise we would be overloaded, overwhelmed. And so what it lets in are the things that you're building awareness for, you have questions about, that have dominant importance for. And if you're engaging with what's dark and scary, the challenge is we start seeing more and more of that in our, in our perception. And that doesn't leave a lot of bandwidth for possibility, hope, opportunity, what you could be grateful for, right? And so that could be a challenge. We know that chronic stress has been shown to shrink the human brain. Chronic fear actually suppresses our immune system. So that's interesting, right? A whole area of science called psychoneuroimmunology. It makes you more susceptible to colds, to flus, to viruses, right? And so when we're talking about care, obviously there are a lot of things we could do to care for ourselves. And I mean, I'm just kind of highlighting the thing that might not be is what we're feeding our minds. And so we can make choices. We can make choices for clarity, is making these questions, the choices going back to power decisions on what we're feeding our minds and our bodies. Third C is kind of obvious, but it's not something we think about all the time. I think one of the antidotes to fear, going back to fear, is besides gratitude. And a lot of times we know gratitude. I did a Thanksgiving episode on our podcast about how gratitude could rewire our nervous system for performance. And it's interesting because you don't have to wait for a greater life to feel grateful. You
Hmm.
could start feeling grateful, and I think people would immediately say they have a greater life. Because what we appreciate appreciates, right? Yeah, it gets better and grows. But going back to that's one antidote to fear. The other one I would say is the third C, which is contribution.
Hmm.
I think making a difference. I think even for me, like growing up with learning difficulties, my biggest challenge, I mean, my superpower was being invisible, right? I didn't want to be seen. I didn't want to, maybe deep down, I wanted to be seen and heard, but I was mostly hiding, in the back, sitting behind a tall kid because I never had the answers. So I was very phobic of public speaking, which the universe has this, sense of humor, because my two biggest challenge were learning and public speaking. And, what do I do for a living? I
I
just
mean, now you're educating the world on how to learn faster, and
do
you
that.
talk publicly for a living.
Yeah, and so it's kind of it's kind of interesting how your struggles can become strengths, right?
Mm.
Your their challenges could lead to change, which was what I'm hoping for with my sleep, right? Because of all this perfect storm of having this kind of severe challenge I want to overcome. I think one nice dominant question to ask yourself is, where's the gift in this? My challenges were learning, and the gift was I discovered how to learn better, right? I don't believe it's how smart you are. We've talked about this in previous podcasts. So it's really, how are you smart? My challenge was public speaking. I would be, I'd be so fearful. I would be shaking and almost pass out. And that led to a strength. And I hope there's a gift in even the challenges I had with sleep. I could tell you two of them automatically. Number one, with the lack of sleep, it forced me to double down on everything I teach,
Hmm.
because how would I be able to perform and do anything if I wasn't, be able to have that edge of reading faster, remembering things, and assimilating information, and all my routines and everything. But the other gift was it forced me to be very conscious of my commitments. I don't know how it is with you, but some people who are watching might identify with saying yes too often, right? You overcommit, you have too many browsers open, and it uses up so much energy. And so when you have a finite, you feel like you have a limited amount of energy or temperament or emotion, or, and like with your lack of sleep. And I don't say, yeah, everything for me is really, it's heck yes or heck no. I mean, that kind of filter. And so like right now, there's nowhere I'd rather be with no one else. You know what I mean? So everything is like it's very, makes things very clear, which I think it's important nowadays for people who are struggling with mental exhaustion, mental fatigue, burnout.
People are so lax with their time, and it is the most precious and limited resource that we have. Once you spend it, you don't get it back.
Yeah, and that's the one thing. I mean, people could always make more money, I mean, and it's the one thing that's actually, equal, at least in a day. And not everybody has the same income or the same education level or the same network, right? But everybody has 24 hours in a day, right? We have 86,400 seconds. And what we invest, we get to keep in the future, but in whatever's not is just lost,
Hmm.
right? And there's no judgment. People want to binge watch, and do like whatever they do, or that's their life. Then it's prerogative. People have choice and free will. It's amazing. But then we can't complain about stuff then, right? I mean, you can't be upset by the results you didn't get by the work you didn't do. So, a lot of energy goes into complaining and comparison and overthinking, and we try to direct our clients away from that. But going back to contribution, I just feel like it's the antidote to fear. It's if I get nervous a little bit still, butterflies before. I'm here in Los Angeles. I just spoke for 2,000 people yesterday. I'm going out tomorrow to Vegas to speak for thousands there, and I still get a little nervous, but then I just think about contribution. Like I think about one person in that audience whose life, needs to could use some of this information, and I feel more obligation to be able to do that because shame on me if there's somebody there struggling like I did so for so many years, and I don't help them, and that gets me out of myself and that contribution. So, for us, we like Limitless, we gave away 100% of the proceeds, multiple six figures to build schools. We built schools everywhere from Ghana to Guatemala to Kenya, full health care for the children, clean water, also Alzheimer's research. So many great organizations that you and I know of, and some of um, our peers. I lost my grandmother to Alzheimer's when I was going through my learning difficulties, and women, as you know, are twice as likely to experience Alzheimer's than men. So for specifically women's research.
Love that.
Um, so yeah, but I mean, in terms of contribution, it doesn't have to be like that. It could be how can you invest a little bit of your time, your talent, your treasure, just to make a difference and just put you in a good place. Maybe make it food for frontline workers. Maybe it's checking on somebody who's elderly and a little bit compromised and they're lonely, that kind of thing. And then finally, the last couple of C's, besides clarity and care and contribution, I would say creativity. Like I don't know what have you been doing the past year and a half? I mean, everybody has like a to-do list, but do we have like a create list?
So
I
important.
yeah, I mean, I think the future belongs to creators. So I love it, that some people creating new businesses, some people are doing their music, and then they get the
Yeah.
guitar and they're singing. Other people are writing, but I think even before this, jobs were going to they're being outsourced, right? They're going to automation, they're going to artificial intelligence, and what's not going to be outsourced to a machine is what's truly limitless. Like there's no limit to our creativity. There's no limit to human imagination. There's no limit to our ability to solve problems, our ability to come together, in difficult times. And so, yeah, it's interesting. There's during the Great Plague that Shakespeare, when I was doing research, created some amazing masterpieces. Macbeth, Antony and Cleopatra. During the plague, Isaac Newton had to physically distance himself from London. They closed down the university there, and he had to go home. Even back then, and he was sitting underneath a tree, and an apple fell on his head, and he created the theories of motion, the theories of gravity,
Hmm.
right? And so again, we don't have to do it at that level, but whatever you always wanted to create, in your life, maybe you're a parent, you wanted to create something, for your students, for your kids, maybe like homeschool, it's whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, it
I'd like
reminds me
to.
of one of my favorite lines from Game of Thrones.
Mhm,
Peter Baelish is talking to Varys in the I forget what it's called, like the main throne area
mhm.
in at King's Landing, and Varys says to Peter Baelish, that just everything is in such disarray. Everybody's warring, fighting. There's so much chaos, and Varys makes a comment implying that chaos is a pit. It's like a pit of despair, a pit into which all hope falls, never to be seen again, right? And Baelish responds to him, Varys, chaos isn't a pit. Chaos is a ladder. And I just love that. It
That
reminds
is really
me
good.
of that.
With the accent and everything.
Yeah, with the accents and
Yeah.
everything. It's one of my favorite lines in one of my favorite shows. So it's just something
Mm,
that always has resonated with me. The notion that, we tend to see danger and chaos as being a point of repression. Like
mhm,
some of us feel repressed during those moments, but then others see great opportunity,
mm.
which is, I think, kind of like, the gist of what it is that you're saying.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, and I want to maybe we could chat about how mindset affects and kind of filters meaning for us. That somebody could have the same experience and interpret it in different ways. Whether looking at the economy or politics or any kind of situation.
Hmm.
So that's creativity. And again, simple choice. Life is a C between B and D. What choices can we make to just to be a little bit more creative? And I'm not saying it has to take a lot of time. with this. It could be even journaling for 10 minutes, or writing or going. I think it's very important that we schedule a white space in our days, to just think and be creative. Because if we just wait in between, and it is those empty spaces are very rare. You know what I mean? It usually fills with other stuff that not as important. I always tell people I think the most important thing is to keep the most important things the most important things. It's kind of a little bit of a, a tongue twister, but yeah, it's not just about time management, it's about priority management, right? I'm going back to the 24 hours we have in a day. It's setting our priorities. We have the 24 hours in a day, but what are we going to emphasize? What are we going to put first? And like even Dr. Stephen Covey's going back to his book, right? Put first things first, right? And then finally, the fifth C, besides clarity and care and contribution, and creativity, I would say is capabilities. And this quote that I've heard in different iterations, I'm sure your audience has. It's like we don't rise to the level of other people's expectations as much as we fall to the level of our own training. And I think again we have a to-do list which is rapidly growing, but do we have a to learn list? Like what's on everyone's to learn list? And I think we do these things where now if especially if you are spending more time at home or have been spending more time at home and you have more time, like what are you putting on there? Because the future belongs to those learners, right? We have to constantly be upgrading our knowledge, our skills, our own abilities, to be more valuable. And I think one of the most important things people could be doing is reading. I did so much reading. I was with so many of our clients. We had reading, challenges, a book a week club, and everything else like that. We got so much engagement, this past year and a half because people, and in book sales, I hear are actually doing really well,
Hmm.
because of everything. And I just think if somebody has decades of experience and they put into a book and you could sit down in a few days and read a book or listen to an audible, then you could download decades into days. The average person reading one or two books a year compared to somebody who's doing upwards of 50 books a year. Huge. It's not even like a gap between those who have and those who don't have. There's also a gap of those who know and those who don't know. And those who know can make better decisions, going back to the power of decisions and choice, more accurate, useful decisions. And so, what's on everyone's to learn list? And my focus, we've covered speed reading in a previous episode on your show. My focus is on meta learning. Learning how to learn. Because I feel like if someone can learn how to learn, like learn how to, what does that mean? Learn how to focus and concentrate, learn how to study better, take notes, understand information better, remember that information, improve their memory. And make better, critical thinking. I think they could apply that towards anything better, whether it's money, management, marketing, martial arts, music, everything gets movement, everything gets better and easier. So those are five. I would also add now that I think about it, a six C. There are probably a lot more six C's. I'm curious. People could post this on social media and suggest it, tag us both so we get to see it. Community,
Hmm.
with this where people feel separate, and so distance or apprehensive. I think more and more people need to connect, and who we spend time with is who we become. And and people ask how, with the book title Limitless, it's like, how do you become limitless in this limited world? And my answer, I think, really is we do it together. All
Well,
right.
there's that famous line, right? I don't know where it originated from, but you become the average of the five or
Hmm.
six or seven people that you hang out with most.
Yeah, I think it, and that's a having a positive peer group. We all need somebody to encourage us, to challenge us, to give us hope, to cheer us on. And if you haven't found that person, I would recommend be that person for somebody else.
Hmm.
You know, yeah, I was reading studies on mirror neurons and how they potentially could help. It's part of the in our nervous system where it creates empathy, and we start imitating people around us, right? Who we spend time with. I always tell people to watch because these are the things that imitated WATCH, and of course I use a lot of acronyms and mnemonics. The W say words. We tend to adopt the language patterns of people around us for
Hmm.
sure. The A in watch is your actions. Certainly, we start duplicating the behaviors of people around us. You spend time. That's why they say like married couples they tend to look like each other over time, or they look like their pet or something like that because they're spending a lot of time. But watch your actions. The T in watch. thoughts. Thoughts are really things, and I know you've covered this in episodes. And The see and watch or character.
Hmm.
We tend to have the same standards of the people around us, in terms of integrity also as well. And and that spreads. That's as contagious as anything else. I read this quote. I don't know who to attribute it to, but it says, "Integrity is measured. It's the distance between your lips and your life.
Wow.
Integrity is the distance between your lips and your life." And yeah, so you want to manage your character, and then also the H in is your habits. We've heard the phrase, first you create your habits, then your habits create you. And I really do believe, like, I think Duke University said 40% of our behaviors each day is habitual. We're not even thinking about it. We're just on autopilot, which is great because it conserves, as, cognitive energy, because there's a big load on, coming from life. But then we'd actually sit down and design those things. And so, yeah, who we spend time with is who we become. If you're around 9 broke people, be careful because you're probably going to be number 10, that kind of idea. But having a positive community of people that are supportive, and it's meant for, like, everything. You date back, hunter gatherers, right? Survival. Those who had people watching their back and, had a village were more likely to be able to survive. And so we got to pick our village. um, the African proverb: if you want to go further, you go alone. If you want to go faster, you go alone. If you want further, we go together.
I love that. And you are what you repeatedly do. I definitely
Hmm.
believe that to be true. Have you ever, I'm just curious, had
Yeah.
to unfriend somebody? What do you recommend for people that, like in that situation where they have a friend
Yeah.
group, but there's maybe one or two bad apples that you don't necessarily want to extract their habits and their patterns and energy from.
Yeah. I mean, I think my thing with, we could do anything, but we can't do everything. That's this idea. Is like, everyone has goals. You could do anything, but you can't do everything. And I think the same thing happens with people, not just ideas and things we're implementing, but individuals.
Mm,
Meaning that, you can be a great friend, but you can't put all your energy everywhere because there's always this, that it could deplete you. And my feeling generally with that is that if somebody's drowning, certainly I'm gonna help that person, right? And if I have, but if that person's gonna pull me down and I'm gonna drown also, and then I can't be there for my family and my friends and people are counting on me, then that could be an interesting choice point.
Some people also just don't want the help.
This is true. Some people, like, there's some things, and I don't know who's listening to this that needs to hear this, but some things, like, if you're in a storm right now, some things you can only learn in a storm, for sure. And then also, some people create a storm and they're upset that it rains. So I don't know, like, but yeah, when it comes to people, having a positive peer group is important, but it's about energy, right? And it's like some people are energy vampires. Some people are batteries included, but there's some people just, I don't know where their batteries are, but they're stealing your batteries. They're stealing your dreams, they're stealing your hope. And some people could actually be sincere, meaning they could have positive intent because that's, the road, right, is paved with positive intentions. Um, they don't want to, maybe they're saying, like, why are you always listening to, Genius Life and reading all those books and, listening to, and or eating all those foods and stuff like that. But, maybe they're saying it because they don't want to lose you because you're growing and, they want to stay connected to you. Or maybe they don't want you to get your hopes up, or I have some kind of positive intent. But they can be sincere, but they can be sincerely wrong also as well. So I think you can still love, especially if it's family or friends, you can still love them, but it doesn't mean you have to spend a whole lot of time with them, and having borders again and boundaries. You make sure when you say yes to somebody or something, we're not consistently saying no to ourselves.
I love that.
Yeah.
And, certainly this isn't the case for everybody, but we do live in a time that seems to applaud, at least to some degree, victim mindset.
Mhm.
Now there's an emotional home for people that just live in this persistent state of victimhood. And I think that's really unfortunate as well.
Yeah, I think, and this is all about, for me, it's all about maintaining our agency, our responsibility, our accountability, because I mentioned this on a previous episode with you, but it's, when I got to spend time with Stan Lee, I was like, "Who's your favorite superhero?" And he says, "Iron Man." And he's like, "Jim, who's yours?" And I said, "Spider Man," because he had the Spider Man tie on, and Spider Man was one of my favorite because he was like, I wasn't really smart back in high school, but I was definitely, like, kind of bullied and awkward. And I still reverse things, Max. And sometimes maybe because of my my head injuries and stuff when I read. Sometimes I reverse things or I hear things. I was like, yeah, you're right. With great, and he's because when I said Spider-Man, he says, with great power comes great responsibility. And I reversed it. I was like, you're right. And the opposite is also true. With great responsibility comes great power. When we take responsibility for something, we have great power to make it better. But making complaining and making excuses, it doesn't feel like it's taking a whole lot of responsibility. And it's just, if anything, it takes up a lot of energy and a lot of time that could be used to making things better. And some people, when people are complaining, like most people, honestly, it's called the spotlight effect. The spotlight effect is where we emphasize like what people are thinking about us, or if even they're thinking about us at all, right? In terms of comparison and everything. But I would say that and some people are just happy that it's you, that you're going through all this stuff and they're just happy, but it doesn't affect real change. And so I think it's important for us to take personal responsibility. Even if I was to talk to the 9-year-old version of myself that was, really shy, I would say like, hey, you are 100% responsible for your life. And that's kind of harsh, but the truth is, yes, if where we are right now, it's been shaped by our past experiences, external factors, the expectations of other people and everything. But we are 100% responsible for our life right now and moving forward. And when we claim responsibility and agency, we have the power to make things better. Because if what's the alternative? Like we just, complain. I mean, it's like, yes, we can complain and it could be true. And so what? Like what has changed in our life?
So well said. How can we become better learners? You talked about meta learning
Hmm.
before, but I mean, I think like this whole process of knowledge acquisition, retention, and utilization. How can we
Yeah.
become better at that? I'm also really interested in this topic. I'd love if you could speak to this.
Yeah.
The idea of verbal fluency.
Hmm.
You listen to some people such as yourself, such as Jordan Peterson, Russell Brand, people
Hmm.
with profound skills when it comes to verbal fluency, being able to like not just retain knowledge, but to spit it out like like a linguistic surgeon. I think that's a skill that a lot of people, especially with the proliferation of podcasts and apps like Clubhouse and things like that, really
Right.
want. So if you have, yeah,
Yeah.
how can we better achieve
Do
that?
you think there's a parallel between that and being able to express yourself, not just like verbally, so people could hear it auditorily, but also through writing? Do you think
Hmm.
some people that, in your background of
There's
as a
probably a correlation. I think I mean, some people are better writers than they are
Mhm.
speakers. Some people are better speakers than they are writers. Some people are great at both.
Yeah, I mean, and also how it presents itself. Part of it, was this was definitely trained. So I just need to address the thing that I wasn't like born to any degree. I'm successful in those kind of areas. It's definitely not something that I was born with. It's something that was trained through patience, through persistence, through practice, and so it's definitely not a natural gift for me. My teachers would have been surprised I read a book, dude.
Hmm.
Like if none, much less wrote a book. I was on the debate team for literally one day, and so I joined because I needed to up my my criteria to get into school and stuff like that back in high school. And I was just like, I can't do this. I was like so paralyzed. I mean, I think a lot of it also comes from the amount of input I have
Hmm.
in terms of reading. So I get to read and see the different styles from all the different authors and see certain things I like, certain things. There's no such thing, I believe, as necessarily in a lot of ways a good or bad memory. I think there's more of a trained memory and untrained memory. It certainly helps that I can remember these quotes, my sayings, over pretty easily and effortlessly, just because that muscle has been flexed for so many years.
Do you write them first? Like, what's
Yeah.
your process like?
Yeah, if I see a great quote in a book, I'll highlight it. I will write it down or put it in a notepad.
Hmm.
I'm also a little practice because some of it is a spaced repetition where I'll look at it pretty every so often and even comment with these quotes. If I come up with my own quote, I'll comment it on on your Instagram or other peers because they'll post something. I'm like, oh, that's really interesting on kindness, or responsibility or accountability or growth, and then I'll put like my quote there. So then I get to see it. So the repetition definitely helps. Um, and so, and also it's personally meaningful for me, meaning that when you tie something to your purpose, it's a whole lot easier. Just like when people learn something and they're interested in that topic, and they have higher fidelity, and they're able to not only learn it better but retain it longer also as well. When it comes to a model of accelerated learning, And we've covered in different portions of these, and maybe you could put in your show notes, in previous episodes. Um, let me show you my model for it. This is my framework for accelerated meta learning, and I would actually I'll make this interactive with everyone who's listening because I would actually love to ask you. I'll run you through the model. All right. So, if you're not working out and or driving or something that's dangerous, like maybe take notes on this, and that'll work. So, I want everyone to take out a piece of paper and just think about an area of your life where you feel stuck. And I did this on a podcast on how to get unstuck. It was a this story where this truck driver wasn't paying attention, as often we don't pay attention in life, and he ends up going underneath a bridge, and the bridge is too low for his cargo, and he gets stuck. And so, what do we do? That's like what we do in life. Sometimes we're not paying attention, we hit something, we get stuck, immobilized, and what do? You just start putting on the gas, and sometimes we like, oh, we're stuck in this relationship, I'm stuck in this button, I have to work harder. And
Hmm.
then he just gets more and more stuck, right? And then he tries to back out. And by that time he can't anymore because he's really in there. And then all this traffic starts building up behind him, obviously, and it starts to really, really build up. And crowds start showing up, wondering what's going on, getting out of their cars and everything. And then emergency vehicles come, and they don't know what to do. They start pushing like the truck through the bridge, and nothing. They start trying to pull it out, nothing. And then there's this 6-year-old child, there watching all this with his parents, and he's like, "Why don't you let out some of the air in the tires?" He did it. The truck come down, and obviously it came out because what the adults wanted to do is they wanted to blow up they were going to destroy the truck,
Mm.
right? And that's kind of like the elusive obvious. And I think sometimes, even when you're looking at health and the state of health, sometimes the elusive obvious is, it's right there in front of us, that a child could see it, but, there's so much complexity out there, and anybody can they make things more complex. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with complexity, but sometimes people use it to create, chaos and confusion. And sometimes it's, the simple answer is sometimes the best. So I want to think about an area you feel stuck, where you feel like, and limitless is not, let's get clear. Limitless is not about being perfect, right? Limitless is about advancing. It's about making progress, not comparing yourself to anybody else, but, who you were yesterday, or maybe the best version of yourself. For me, it's always been, who do I want to make proud? It's always been the same answer. I got this question like 15 years ago. Like, who do you want? Why are you doing what you do? Because I think purpose plays a big role in what motivates us to excel, right? Who are we doing it for? Who's counting us to be, on our A game, right? To be able to show up really well. And for me, I want to make proud two people, right? And a lot of people, when I say that, they automatically think of, parents or something. And that's actually never. I mean, I want them to be, but I have no control over whether or not people perceive that, or kids or whatever. But I always want to make that 90-year-old version of myself proud, the 90-year-old me.
Mm.
And then, and then the 9-year-old me, thinking about that 9-year-old boy who was labeled broken, by a teacher, or, bullied and everything else. I want that boy to be proud of who he's becoming. But that's my purpose, going back to that. So feel like where you're not making progress, and maybe where you feel like you're in a box, everyone. And that box, and whether maybe it's a health, maybe it's your health or wellness, maybe it's relationships, maybe it's financial or impact. Um, that box is by definition three-dimensional. So the three forces that contain that box, but there are three forces that will liberate you out of that box. And I call it the limitless model. And going to answer your question for meta learning, draw a Venn diagram. So I want everyone to draw three intersecting circles, and kind of like Mickey Mouse, two ears that overlap and a face that overlap with those two ears. And even if you can't draw it, just imagine it. And even if you can't imagine it, because people then imagine you can imagine it, right? And then so I'm going to illustrate those three dimensions by three M's, right? The last one, the face, I'll start with, which is the one on the bottom, are the methods. Those are the methods of accelerated learning: how to remember names, how to learn a language, how to memorize a TEDx talk or a toast at a wedding, how to read faster. Those are methodologies. And, in the case of, maybe health, maybe it's methods for intermittent fasting, right? Or whatever, fitness, or whatever happens to be, exercise. Everybody knows the methods, but if they're still stuck in a box, then something's not being addressed, right? Two forces. Sometimes they're invisible. So those are the first two circles. The first one is your mindset, right? And we alluded to that, in the beginning. Mindset for me, very specifically, is the set of assumptions and attitudes. It's attitudes and assumptions about something.
Hmm.
So your mindset about health. What are your attitudes and assumptions about health? What are your attitudes, assumptions about money? What your attitude, because that's certainly going to affect things, right? Your attitudes, assumptions about relationships, and what it means to be, you know, um, a good friend. Attitudes is assumptions also about yourself. So let's start there. So three things I know would fall in that circle for everybody, and people could write this down. What I believe is possible, right? Because someone could learn a method on how to get, super fit or cut or whatever, right? But if their mindset is, I don't believe it's possible, then they're still stuck in that box,
Right.
right? They can learn a methodology for remembering names and faces, but if they believe, oh, I'm too old, I'm really dumb, I was able, then they're still stuck. So mindset, what I believe is possible. Second one, what I believe I'm capable of. Because somebody could believe it's possible for you, Max, but they might not believe they're capable of it,
Hmm.
right? And so that needs to be addressed. Otherwise, the method, they're not even going to do the method because all behavior is belief driven, right? And so, I always tell people, like, people come. I did just this yesterday morning when I was speaking. People at the break are like, oh, Jim, I'm just really have a horrible memory. I just say, look, stop. If you fight for your limitations, you get to keep them, right? Because like whatever, your brain is like this supercomputer, and your self talk is the program it will run. So if you tell yourself, I'm not good at remembering names, you will not remember people's names because you just program your computer not to,
It's
right?
a limiting belief, right?
It certainly is. In there in Limitless, I talk about 7 lies to learning because I think learning precedes everything, right? And whatever you're going to apply that to. And one of the lies is like genius is born. Like people either have, but I and we just talk about how genius is built, right? And different things, or how your memory is fixed, right? And like your shoe size, and it's absolutely not true, right? And so we debunk those lies. A lie for me stands for, of course, stands for something. Limited idea entertained.
Hmm.
It's a limited idea that you're entertaining. It's not necessarily true that you're too old or you're not smart enough, you're not capable. It's just an idea that we're giving it certainty when it doesn't have to have it. You know what it is? It's just a bunch of BS, right? Belief systems, right? So everything stands for something. It's all the negative belief systems that we have. But going back to mindset, what I believe is possible, what I believe I'm capable of. And the third one I'll throw in there if we want to get really raw in this conversation, what you believe you deserve, in terms of, I think a lot of times, like, people might think it's possible or maybe they're capable of it, but they self sabotage, right? Because they don't believe they deserve it because of something, expectations, opinions of parents or whatever it is, or, past something they were hurt in a relationship or whatever. They don't believe they deserve that money. They don't deserve to be healthy. If somebody doesn't believe it's possible for them to heal, or they don't believe they deserve to be healthy and heal, what are those methods going to do for them, right? So these are the things that need to be addressed. We talk about different strategies in the book, but then there's also, there's talk therapy, right? There's, there's things that people could do with plant medicine, and stuff like that. There's EFT, emotional freedom technique, tapping, right? EMDR. There's all kinds of strategies, self hypnosis, a lot of strategies. But how can you address it unless you pinpoint it, right? Otherwise, if you're not, the beginning point of anything for people to change is awareness. And some people aren't even aware, and they're wondering why, how do come I know all this stuff and I'm not doing any of this stuff, right? Because that first M is not being addressed. And then,
I started doing talk therapy over the
Mhm.
course of the pandemic for the first time in my adult life. And my therapist practices, she specializes in EMDR.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm a fan.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
great. And then tapping is just like an extension of that that you can do on your own,
Hmm.
right? It's so cool.
Yeah, there's so many resources that are available for people, who are just looking, and willing to do their research. And I appreciate everybody who's even on that path because, I believe that there's a version of ourselves that we haven't met yet, and the goal is to keep showing up every single day, right, until we're introduced to that person, till we get to meet that person. But so first of all, it's mindset. I put that first because initially, Limitless was a book all on methods. It was just everything what I teach, for individuals and organizations on how to accelerate their learning and stuff. But before I hit send to my publisher, I was like, okay, this is my first book. I got to get this right. I want to be proud of this myself. Will 100% of the people read this book get, the results that they're hoping for? And my honest answer was no way, they won't, because they're not doing, because I'm not addressing these two other areas, right? A lot of people know what to do, but they don't do what they know. Because the truth is, people know what they should be doing, but common sense is not common practice. So what keeps us from it? Mindset. The second M, the final M, is motivation, right? And I could break down motivation, and we could put accelerated learning. And I'd love to talk to you about these three areas. And when it comes to health, because I always like text you about like, hey, I have this person, I have this, or I have this issue, and I'm sure you get a lot of those texts. But so the second M is motivation, because you could have a limitless mindset. You could believe it's possible for me to learn this, or to have this body, or to have this relationship, whatever, and know what to do. But you can be not motivated. So then, if you're not motivated and you're procrastinating, then you're stuck in that box. Because if you self sabotage, for mostly that's a mindset issue. You don't believe you deserve it or you're capable of it. But if you procrastinate, that's definitely a motivation issue,
Hmm.
right? And so you're not motivated to get unstuck. And so motivation for me is three forces, and this is the formula for limitless motivation. If you get anything out of this conversation, my big pet peeve is knowledge is not power. Like, that's one of the lies I talk about in there in mindset. You have to dissolve that. Knowledge is potential power. It becomes power when we utilize it, right? Like, somebody could read your book, and if they don't apply it, the truth is they're no different than somebody who's illiterate that couldn't read the book in the first place, right? And so all the podcast programs, coaching online, everything, none of it works unless we work, right? That's the truth. That being said, what motivates yourself, and how do you motivate other people? You motivate your significant other, your kids to clean their room or to study, your prospects to be able to buy something that you have to offer. Here's the formula: P times E times S3. And I put a lot in, this is my 30th year of teaching. So I have a lot of field testing in terms of why do some people go through our program, 100 people from 195 nations, and some people just don't complete it at all. P times E times S3. P, we've already mentioned, is purpose. All right. It's interesting. I had this encounter with somebody that I wouldn't say as a friend, but an acquaintance. And as context, this person was very unhealthy. I mean, like tipping point. I was like, he was a walking time bomb.
Hmm.
And friends, family, acquaintances, we were all just like, hey, why don't you stop doing this or start doing this? The thing never changed, right? And eventually has a heart attack, almost dies, and he goes back to his old lifestyle,
Wow.
right? And and but I see him on the street recently, and I was like, I didn't even recognize him, and because he looked familiar, but I was like, he was very different. And not only does he look younger and healthier, but he had just this glow about him. And I was like, like, what happened? I was like, I'm just curious. Like, he's like, oh, I'm doing this and this, and I'm like, yeah, well, we've been telling you that for years. You should be doing that. Why are you doing it now? He's like, I came back from a business trip, and then my daughter was hysterical, like crying out of her mind. And when she finally stopped, she had a dream that I died and I wasn't, there, and like this whole thing. And once he's like, everything changed, right? That's purpose, right? Purpose for a lot of people, it's not. Anyone can get intellectual cognitive purpose. Oh, I want to hit these goals because I want to make more money and I want to. Everyone knows that, but if they don't feel it, they don't do anything about it, right? And I always go back to feelings because that's even core to memory. Information by itself is forgettable, but when you tie emotion to something, it becomes unforgettable. It's just like Maya Angelou's, saying that people forget what you say, they'll forget what you did, but they'll always remember how you made them feel.
Hmm.
Right. And then, but especially that's other people. But when we think about ourselves, like, what are the things that we're remembering, the things that we feel? And if we don't feel that purpose, we're not going to do anything about it. So my big thing is get it out of your head and put it in your heart. Right. That's the formula: head, heart, hands. Even if you look at the three M's, mindset's head, motivation's heart, and method is the hands, how you're going to actually use this stuff. Right. So you're going from head to your heart to your hands. And if you're just keeping your head, you have KPIs, goals, vision, whatever it is, but you're not acting with your hands because we're not logical. We're just not. We're biological, certainly. You think about dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin. We're just this chemical soup, right? And so, if you're a person that you want to motivate, this is for yourselves. But if you want to motivate your spouse or your kids or someone to buy, people don't buy logically; they buy emotionally, and they justify logically, right? So you got to get them to purpose. Now, here's the thing: that's the first part. Somebody can have limitless purpose and still procrastinate, not be motivated. You need E, and you're an expert at this. E stands for energy. A lot of time, let's say somebody's not sleeping, they have a newborn child, they're freaked out with the pandemic and everything that's going on. They haven't slept in 3 nights. They're not going to be very motivated to work out. There's not, right? Because exhaustion will make a coward out of anybody,
Mm.
right? It'll just stall everything. If, let's say, I say, you know, people see photos of me with Elon or Oprah or these people. We bonded over books. That's my secret, right? I'm just very well read, and and these people, leaders are readers, right? And so, if to get through a book a week, the average person who just reads like 200 words a minute, about 45 minutes a day, right? The average book has about how many I don't know how many words you have in your book, but on Amazon they
I
say,
think about 80,000, 80
yeah,
to 100,000, something like that,
which
if
is
I recall
which
correctly.
is more than the average book,
Yeah.
but the average book has about 64,000 around. So the average person reads 200 words a minute. So that takes 320 minutes to get through a book. Sounds like a lot, but if you divide that by 7, that's about 45 minutes a day,
Mm.
right? And you triple your reading speed, like 15 minutes a day, right? So that's why it's not, but 45 minutes a day, let's say you want to do that, that's your goal, to be motivated to read 45 minutes a day, but you just ate a big processed meal and you're in a food coma, right? Energy's down, then you're not going to be motivated, right? And so it has to be addressed. Stress takes a lot of energy out of the system. So it's not just about time management, priority management. What about energy management, right? And here's the thing, you do not have energy. You're like, yes, that's the problem. I do not have any energy. You do energy. You know what I mean? A big part of what we teach with quick learning, the principle is you take your nouns, you turn them into verbs, meaning people hypnotize themselves. Like, I think your show, my show, it's about transcending. Big part of it is ending the trance, transcend, right? You end the trance about what's possible. And part of it is coming from the outside, marketing, media saying you're broken and you just like, fear, everything else like that. So that's a trance, but also it's self hypnosis. When you say, I don't have creativity to write today, you don't have creativity, you do creative things, right? I don't have focus to get things done. You don't have focus, you do focus, right? So we could hypnotize ourselves with the language saying, I have this, as opposed to I could do this. And so going back to energy, you don't have energy, you do things to help create energy. Right. So if you're stressed all the time, that's taking, energy out of the system. If we're on energy vampires, taking energy out of the system, right? You're not exercising, you're not generating energy, if you're not sleeping, so on. So you need to optimize your energy, things that everything that you talk about on your show. And then finally, somebody could have the P and the E, purpose and limitless energy, and still not be motivated. And I was thinking, like, because I know people who are fit in that category, but they're still not doing this stuff. And I was like, oh, that thing can be too big. Like, oh, I want to meet the love of my life and live happily thereafter. I want to have that perfect body, or I want to get 1 million followers, or whatever it is, right? Build the next unicorn. That's way too big. So S3 in the equation, the final part, small, simple steps.
Mm.
I think one of the things that halts our progress and demotivates us is if you're intimidated by something or you're confused. And we know a confused mind doesn't do anything, right? So clarity is power, small, simple steps. We've had on our show people like James Clear about atomic habits, tiny habits, Dr. BJ Fogg, break things down into small, simple steps. And so here's the magic thing. So if you want to work out and that's you want to be motivated to work out, right? As your body moves, your brain grooves. Exercise is probably one of the most documented thing that's good for your brain, right? It's good for your heart, it's good for your head, right? Brain derived neurotropic factors, all of that. But if you're not doing that, and I don't just mean working out, I mean just like moving throughout the day. Let's start like there. But if you're not doing that, maybe that's too big and that's too intimidating. A small, simple step, put on your running shoes, right? It's the hard part is like getting into the gym, right? If you want to get your kids to floss their teeth, they're just not doing it. Floss one tooth, right? No one's going to stop at one tooth. They want to clean the room, just get them to put one sock in the hamper, right? Inch by inch, it's a cinch. Yard by yard, it's too hard. That's just true, right? And if someone can't read 45 minutes a day, I totally get it. That's brand. Open up the book. How about that, right? Right. Read one line, and consistency, little by little, a little becomes a lot, right? So that's the equation I would say. And you could take this and superimpose it for yourself, but also if you need to motivate somebody else, say you need them to feel the purpose, because without reasons, you won't get the result. 100%. Are they just not having energy? Because some people, and you could do this at a global scale too. Like if you look at what people think, like just what's in the media sphere, about social justice, about, pandemics, everything. You could break things down into mindset, motivation, and methods, about purpose. And energy doesn't have to be just physical. It could be capital, right? It could be resources, at a micro level or at a community, nation, global, macro level. And then finally, the last one are methods. And I'll leave everybody with this because I want to ask you a question about this model where mindset crosses over with motivation, because there are other words that you hear in the personal development or performance where mindset and motivation cross over. You have inspiration. I'm gonna give everyone three eyes. Inspiration, like what does an inspiring speaker do or an inspiring movie do for you? It changes your mindset about what's possible and it gives you some little drive and some purpose, motivation, right? But you're inspired, but you don't know what to do, right? Because you don't have the methods. Where mindset crosses over with methods, you have the second eye, which is ideation, right? You believe it's possible in your mind and then you're capable of it and you know what to do, but you don't have the motivation, right? So it's just an idea. And that's pretty common. A lot of people have a lot of ideas. And finally, where motivation and methods cross over, you have the third and final eye, and that's implementation.
Hmm.
Someone's motivated, they have purpose, they have energy, and they have the methods. And so that's implementing. That person's going to be implementing for a long time, but they're still could be stuck in that box because they're only going to be able to achieve what their mindset allows because it's not covering mindset. And then where all three M's and all three I's collect right in the middle, here's a fourth and final I, that's integration. Right in the middle, the center where all three M's and I's connect, that's integration. And for me, that's the limitless state. That's the state where it's just who you are, right? And so when I'm talking to somebody who's excels like yourself, when I'm having conversations with somebody about getting a certain result, is I believe when you're talking about the genius life, is that genius leaves clues. That if somebody is extraordinary in an area with their finances, in their relationship, with their health and wellness, right, with their learning, right, that they're doing certain things other people aren't doing. There's a method behind what looks like magic to the rest of the world. And so when I'm looking for my superpower that I developed over time out of necessity. My inspiration was my desperation. I was on the other side of the bell curve that made the other one like even possible, right? So I struggled so much. And so out of necessity, I had to come up with this, and then coaching people on how to do this. When I talk to you, if I want to talk to you about longevity and energy and all the stuff that you've done with, in your research and your journalism and your writing, is I'm breaking things down into mindset, motivation, and methods. And if somebody is there's this stopgap between where they are and where they want to be, you have to address the bottleneck, right? Because a part of this is we're unlimiting these areas, right? Because if somebody is like not having energy or somebody doesn't have what they want, I'm like, okay, do they believe it's possible? Do they believe they're capable of it? Do they believe they deserve it? And if that's fine, great. But if it's not, then that has to be addressed first. And then motivation, do they have purpose? Or maybe it's here, but they're not feeling their purpose,
Hmm.
or do they not have energy? Do they not have capability, right? Because they're stressed out of their mind or their spouse is, like berating them and taking all their energy and drive. Are they making it too confusing and too overwhelming? Like thinking is good, but overthinking it and wanting to be perfect, perfectionism, that's not good, right?
Right.
So maybe not breaking down to tiny little steps. Or maybe they're using old methods for health and wellness. Maybe they're using old methods for learning, like rote repetition or, like the old study ways or old methods for dating or, whatever. And it's just not good for the times. And so, when we're talking you and I about longevity or health or recovery, my thoughts are like, what are your beliefs about your mindset around health? Like, what are the things that you believe? What are the things you're embarrassed to admit, like that you used to believe, lies? Like, because I would willing to bet for the people who are really exceptional in these areas, there's a common thread of beliefs. Like, do you believe health is something that's static? Like a lot of people in most of society think like, hey, it's just like this is what I'm worth financially, or this is just what I'm worth in a relationship, or this is what health is. Just I either have it or I don't. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think a lot of people think of health as being as just having a nice body,
Hmm.
having a six pack,
Right.
having a lean toned midsection, and strong muscular arms. But health is so much more than that.
Right. And that's their mindset. That's their assumptions, or maybe even and some people have an attitude around health too, that
Yeah.
it's either boring or it's something that's
Well, I think some people feel like they don't deserve it, they can't attain it. When people have, uh, it's sort of like turning a cruise ship around
mm,
for some people because they feel like their optimal health is so far from their present state. But but I love the idea of small, simple things that you can do every day
yeah.
because over the long term, those small, simple things add up. And what you were saying about letting perfect be the enemy of the good,
Right.
that's a major problem in health. There's like
Yeah.
there's often this perfectionist mindset, and it's propagated by influencers for the most part. I mean, it's not propagated by scientists.
Right.
You're not going to see this notion of perfectionism in the nutritional literature. So I think that that's the kind of the message that comes across sometimes, especially via social media and also mainstream media, movies and things like that.
Or maybe people might have picked up, when it comes to health, like it's, like, oh, it's just genetics or something like that. And that would keep people stuck in a box.
Yeah.
right?
Or
If
that
they
you have
believe-
to go to the gym and you have to have an hour-long workout. And
Yep.
for you to have had a good workout, you have to leave the gym sweating. You've got to be sore the next day. None of those are indicators of having had a good workout, by the way.
Right.
So
And those are assumptions. And those are that assumptions will keep people stuck.
hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
Says you'll upgrade your beliefs, you'll upgrade your skills, you'll upgrade your knowledge, and you'll absolutely change the disempowering, destructive habits you have right now. And you will become the type of man capable of achieving the goals. And he goes, by the way, every one of those goals is totally achievable. And I know because I've achieved way more than that in way less time.